Imagine a big, beautiful cake that everyone wants a piece of. That was Africa in the late 1800s. European countries like Britain, France, Belgium, and Portugal all looked at Africa and saw a land full of amazing resources. They saw gold, diamonds, rubber, and so much more. They also saw a massive continent that they could control to show how powerful their empires were. So they decided to have a meeting, called the Berlin Conference, where they literally drew lines on a map and divided the continent among themselves. It was like a giant pizza party where they didn't invite the people who actually owned the pizza. This period was called the Scramble for Africa, and it was the beginning of a long, complicated relationship. Now, you might be asking, how did they just walk in and take over? Well, Europe had a few advantages at the time. They had more advanced weapons, like powerful guns, which made it very difficult for African kingdoms to fight back effectively. They also used a strategy called divide and rule. This meant they would often find existing rivalries between different African groups and use those tensions to their advantage. By promising one group power or resources, they could turn them against another, making it easier to establish control over the entire region. It was a clever but very destructive way to weaken the continent from the inside, ensuring that nobody could unite against them. The whole idea behind this was called colonialism. It wasn't just about taking resources. It was about imposing a whole new way of life. The European powers set up new governments, new laws, and new schools. They told Africans that their own cultures, languages, and traditions were inferior. They forced people to work on plantations or in mines, often under terrible conditions, to extract wealth that was then shipped back to Europe. For decades, African people lived under this system, their lives and destinies controlled by distant rulers who knew very little about the continent they were governing. It was a long period of hardship, but the spirit of the people was never completely broken. So what is decolonization? It's the opposite of all that. It's the process of a country taking back its freedom and becoming independent. It's about kicking out the foreign rulers and saying thanks, but we've got it from here. Decolonization is the story of Africa standing up and reclaiming its own destiny, its own land, and its own identity. It was a long journey, filled with struggle and sacrifice. But it was a journey that had to be taken. It was the moment Africa decided to bake its own cake, using its own recipe, and share it among its own people. This was the powerful idea that would soon sweep across the continent like a wildfire. So, what changed? How did a whole continent go from being under someone else's thumb to raising its own flags? Well, a few big things happened. One of the most important was World War II. You see, many African soldiers were recruited to fight for their colonial rulers like Britain and France, in a war that was all about fighting for freedom from oppression. After the war, these soldiers came home with a new perspective. They thought, wait a second, we just fought a war for freedom in Europe. Why don't we have that same freedom back home? It was a powerful question that sparked a new sense of determination. At the same time, the big European empires were not as strong as they used to be. The war had cost them a lot of money and a lot of power. They were tired and broke. Trying to control vast empires across the sea became incredibly expensive and difficult to manage. People back in Europe also started to question whether it was right to rule over other nations. The world was changing, and the idea that one country could own another was becoming very unpopular. The United States and the Soviet Union, the two new superpowers, were also against colonialism, which put even more pressure on the old European empires to let their colonies go. This created the perfect opportunity for African people to push for their independence. A new generation of educated Africans began to emerge. These were people who had gone to universities, sometimes in Europe or America, and learned about ideas like democracy, self-determination, and human rights. They returned to their home countries with a fire in their bellies, ready to organize their people and demand change. They started forming political parties, writing newspapers, and holding meetings to spread the message of freedom. This growing sense of unity and national pride, known as nationalism, became the engine driving the independence movements across the continent. The inspiration for freedom also came from other parts of the world. In 1947, India gained its independence from Britain, which was a huge deal. It showed everyone that it was possible to stand up to a massive empire and win. This news spread across Africa and filled people with hope. If India could do it, why not Ghana? Why not Kenya? Why not Nigeria? This wind of change, as it was called, blew across the continent, carrying with it the seeds of revolution. The desire for freedom was no longer a quiet whisper. It was becoming a loud, unified roar that could no longer be ignored. Every great movement needs great leaders, and Africa had plenty of them. These were the men and women who stood up and gave a voice to the dreams of millions. One of the first and most influential was Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana. He was a powerful speaker and a brilliant organizer. After studying in the United States and Britain, he returned home with a simple but powerful message: self-government now. He organized peaceful protests, boycotts, and strikes. He wanted to achieve independence without violence, and his strategy worked. In 1957, Ghana became the first country in sub-Saharan Africa to break free from colonial rule, and Nkrumah became its first leader. Another giant of the independence movement was Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya. His journey to freedom was much more difficult and involved a long, armed struggle known as the Mau Mau Uprising. While Kenyatta himself advocated for a peaceful path, the fight for land and freedom in Kenya became violent. He was imprisoned by the British for several years, but he became a symbol of resistance for his people. When Kenya finally gained its independence in 1963, Kenyatta was released and became the nation's founding father. His story shows that the path to freedom was not always a peaceful one. Sometimes it had to be fought for. In West Africa, another important figure was Léopold Sédar Senghor of Senegal. He was a different kind of leader, a poet and a philosopher. He developed the idea of negritude, a movement that celebrated Black identity and culture. He encouraged Africans to be proud of their heritage and to reject the colonial idea that European culture was superior. Senghor believed that political independence was meaningless without cultural independence. He led Senegal to a peaceful independence from France in 1960 and became its first president, proving that leaders could be thinkers and artists as well as politicians. Of course, we cannot talk about freedom in Africa without mentioning Nelson Mandela of South Africa. His fight was against a different kind of oppression called apartheid, a brutal system of racial segregation imposed by a white minority government. Mandela spent 27 years in prison for fighting against this injustice. His resilience and unwavering commitment to equality inspired the world. His struggle showed that even in the face of the most extreme oppression, the human spirit's desire for freedom can never be extinguished. These leaders, and many others like them, were the brave architects of a new independent Africa. Gaining independence was a moment of incredible joy and celebration across the continent. Imagine the scene: colonial flags coming down for the last time and brand new national flags, full of vibrant colors and powerful symbols, rising in their place. People danced in the streets, sang new national anthems, and felt a sense of hope they had not known for generations. For the first time, they were in charge of their own countries. They could elect their own leaders, make their own laws, and build a future for their children. It was a new dawn, filled with promise and endless possibilities. However, the road ahead was not easy. Independence was just the first step. The new African nations faced huge challenges. The colonial powers had left behind many problems. The borders they had drawn often grouped together rival ethnic groups, leading to internal conflicts. The economies were set up to benefit Europe, not Africa, so new leaders had to build everything from scratch: new schools, new hospitals, new industries. It was like being given the keys to a car but finding it has no engine and 3 different kinds of wheels. It was a difficult and often messy process of nation building. Despite these struggles, the spirit of freedom brought about profound changes. Independence gave Africans a renewed sense of dignity and pride. People could finally celebrate their own cultures, speak their own languages, and tell their own stories without shame. Art, music, and literature flourished as artists explored what it meant to be African in a new era of freedom. This cultural rebirth was just as important as the political changes. It was about reclaiming an identity that had been suppressed for so long and showing the world the true richness and diversity of the African continent. Today, on July 25th, 2025, Africa is a continent of over 50 independent nations, each with its own unique story and journey. The path has been filled with triumphs and setbacks, but the continent is bursting with potential. It has the youngest population in the world, vibrant economies, and a growing spirit of innovation. The journey of decolonization is a powerful reminder that freedom is not just a destination, it's a continuous struggle for a better future. The story of Africa's independence is a testament to the enduring power of hope, resilience, and the unbreakable desire of people everywhere to be free.